Morning, third grade. It's Miss G here with our second day of Read Aloud. We are going to throw back to our Read Aloud book, Seekers. The quest begins with Toklo, Kalik, and Lusa. And our story was almost done the last time we read. We have just about one chapter left, and our story will be over. So once we wrap up this Read Aloud book, I will be presenting and doing book talks on a couple other titles for you to pick from. And so at the end of this video, I will post a response to Class Dojo. So please vote. Put your vote in for the title that you want to be read aloud to you tomorrow, because we will be starting a new book. And I'm sorry to Gavin, I do not have the sequel to Wonder. I couldn't find it in the classroom, which means that somebody has checked it out, which is wonderful. I'm glad somebody's reading that. Without further ado, let's finish our Seekers story. Here we go. We were on Lusa's perspective, so I'll reread a little bit here. I believe she was up a tree because a giant grizzly got angry that she entered his territory. Here we go. Here we go. In the morning light, she was able to scan the forest floor below her. There was no sign of the grizzly, and she couldn't find his scent in the air either. She would never forget the earthy smell of his fur. She crept carefully down the tree and ran in the opposite direction from where he'd gone. It meant going out of her way for a while, but she could find another path over the mountain. Anything would be safer than staying in that bear's territory. As she raced through the trees, she passed another one with long scratches on the bark. Now she remembered what King had told her. Stay away from a grizzly's territory. You'll know where they are from claw marks on the trees. She'd been dumb to forget, and lucky to escape with her fur in one piece. She decided it would be safer to go back to traveling at night. She hid in another tree, far from the grizzly's territory, for the rest of the day and climbed down when the sun sank below the mountains. It was harder to find food in the darkness, and hunger gnawed at her belly, but she felt safer among the shadows. So she spent the days hiding in trees for a whole moon. She was steady climbing higher and higher up the mountain, where the clouds seemed closer to the ground, and sometimes it rained for days on end. At last, Lusa reached the top of the mountain, scrambling over a pile of large boulders to emerge onto a wide, flat space where there was no more up, only ground sloping down in every direction. She took shelter in a cave just below the peak, looking down at the lights of the flat-faced homes. And remember, flat faces are humans. They looked like a sky full of stars spread on the ground. The world was so big, so much bigger than she'd imagined. Why hadn't Oka warned her about that? She missed Aisha's gentle warmth, Stella's funny stories, even King's grouchiness. She missed wrestling with Yogi and racing around the bear bowl for treats. She wondered if they even looked up to the Bear Star Watcher at the same time as she did. She wondered if they ever thought of her. She would never know, because she'd never see them again. Resting her head on her paws, Lusa felt cold and sad and hollow, while the moon floated across the sky far above her. The next morning, she emerged from the cave and set out in daylight. She couldn't feel sad forever. She had made a promise to Oka, and she was going to keep it. Do you remember what that promise is? There was no way she could go back to the bear bowl, so she may as well keep going. She was heading down the other side of the mountain now, far from the grizzly's territory, so she decided not to stay in the cave all day and wait for night to fall again. The daylight would help her watch out for bark scratches. There could easily be other brown bears wandering on this side. She scrambled over a ridge of boulders and paused, her heart thumping. Far below her, she could see 3 small lakes laid out next to one another, just as Oka had said. She must be going the right way. A weasel darted across her path, and in her excitement, Lusa sprang to her paws and chased it. It moved too quickly for her to catch, but racing through the grass with the wind in her fur helped to lift her spirits again. Lusa was tired, hungry, and paw-sore by the time she reached the first lake, but the smooth, glittering surface sparkled like starlight in a bowl, and she'd been able to see it through the trees for a long time, calling to her. She plunged into the water with a happy yelp. Now this was a real lake, not like the one she'd found in the flat basin enclosure. And we had said that it was probably a swimming pool that she found. She wallowed in the water, letting it soak through her fur, soothing her scratches. Tiny silver fish darted between her paws, and she chased after them playfully, whooping with joy. A skinny, long-legged animal was watching her from the bank. Its fur was shaggy and brown, and a set of thick antlers sprouted from its head. Lusa thought it might be a moose, from the description she'd heard from Stella and King. It was nice to see another animal that wasn't trying to eat her. "Hello," she called. "Come on in, it's lovely." The moose tilted its head, looking down its nose at her. Then it turned and ambled away. Lusa dunked herself in the water again. When she reached the point where it was too deep for her paws to reach the bottom, she tried waving them in the water and discovered that she could swim. She wished Yogi were there to see. Playing with him was more fun than playing on her own. But she was going the way Oka had described, which meant she was getting closer to Toklo. And when she found him, she wouldn't be lonely anymore. She wondered if he liked swimming too. Perhaps she would teach him. Lusa stayed by the lakes for 5 sunrises, splashing in the water and feasting on berries she found growing close to the shore. It was a relief to stop traveling for a while, although she knew she couldn't rest for long. If Toklo had been moving ever since Oka abandoned him, he could still be a long way away. On the far side of the 3rd lake, Lusa reached the dead forest Oka had told her about. It was the scariest place she'd been since the Fire Beast path. The trees were nothing but black hollow shells, and there were no leaves or berries on any of them. Her paws crunched softly on the dead twigs and ashes as she walked into it. The strangest part was the silence. Lusa couldn't hear any birds or even the scrabbling of tiny animals in the dirt. There was nothing but the sound of her paws and the occasional hiss of the wind or a tree branch creaking. She shuddered, wondering what had happened to the bear spirits. It felt as if perhaps they were still here, clinging to the place where they had died for a second time, but not in a friendly way. Instead, the brittle black trunk seemed to be watching her, waiting for her to get lost and stay there forever. She didn't dare sleep in the dead forest. There were no bushes to shelter her, and the branches rattled and clacked noisily when the wind shook the dead trees. Lusa kept walking all night and far into the next day. She came to the dry riverbed, with the dead forest stretching around it on either side. Oka had been here, but would Toklo be anywhere nearby? Lusa stepped into the riverbed and began to follow it. Her paws were sore and black with soot, but she kept going as night fell, determined to get out of that eerie place. Halfway through the next day, she was stumbling along on heavy, numb paws. She spotted green leaves growing on one of the trees. She pricked up her ears and trotted faster, searching for more signs of life. Sure enough, bits of green were peeking out of the bark on the next tree down, and the next, and ahead of her she spotted a tree with vines wound all the way around it. It felt as if the forest were waking up around her. As soon as she saw bushes covered in leaves, she scrambled up the riverbed to search for berries. But there didn't seem to be any of these bushes, as if they'd been eaten off already. She searched the trees for any scratch marks indicating this was another bear's territory, but she couldn't find any. By nightfall, Lusa was back in a living forest, with the whispers of bear spirits once again murmuring in the breeze. She found a hollow below some tree roots and collapsed into it, too tired even to climb the tree. A group of whirls in the bark beside her looked a bit like Stella, and she pressed her paw to her face, whispering, "Good night, Stella." She hoped that most animals wouldn't come this close to the dead forest, and maybe that would keep her safe. Lusa curled into a ball, feeling loneliness wash over her again. She had never thought it would take this long to find Toklo. Perhaps she would never find him. She remembered the vast landscape she could see from the top of the mountain, stretching all the way to the sky. The wild was just too big. Why did Lusa ever think she would be able to find the lost cub? She would have to learn to survive alone. Chapter 30. Toklo. A cold nose was poking into Toklo's fur. Toklo growled and opened his eyes. "You came back!" Ujarak cried. The sun was pouring through the leaves and sparkling off the bubbles in the river beside them. "Yeah, I did," Toklo said. "But promise me you'll really try hard to stay a bear from now on. I don't want any more flat faces or salmon or birds to deal with." Ujarak bounced on his paws. "Yeah, I'll work on that," he promised. "I hope so," Toklo thought. They climbed out of the forest into another meadow, dotted with flowers nodding in the rustling grass. The mountain loomed above them. There was hardly any snow left now, even at the top. As he stepped out of the trees, Toklo caught the smell of something musty. He glanced around and spotted a tuft of white hair snagged on a bush. He trotted over to examine it more closely. It smelled like mountain goat, and his mouth watered at the thought of fresh prey. "You track," he hissed. "This way." The cub stopped digging for worms and followed him, scrambling over the scattered rocks that had tumbled into the meadow from farther up the mountain. Toklo sniffed carefully, tracking the scent he had found on the hair. It led in a winding path around some bushes where Toklo found scraps of leaves that had been ripped off as the goat grazed. These signs led him up a steep trail to the base of a rocky peak. Toklo paused, looking around. The mountain soared into the sky, sharp-edged against the bright blue sky. Far above, Toklo could see small clouds floating past, as white and fluffy as the goat hair. He focused his gaze back on the mountain, following the rocks down and down, looking for movement. "There," he whispered to Ujarak. A black and white shape flickered among the rocks not far above them. It was the mountain goat, and it hadn't noticed them. He was grazing peacefully on the stubbly grasses that sprouted between the boulders. Toklo edged along the rocky path, his claws slipping on loose stones. It was impossible to hide the sound of his approach. The mountain goat's head popped up. It stared straight at him with his beady black eyes, chewing thoughtfully. And then, with a startling burst of energy, it leaped away, bouncing over the rocks like a leaf on the wind. Toklo growled. "Let's get it," Ujarak cried. Toklo dug his paws in and chased after the goat, determined not to let it get away. This was the first live prey they'd seen in days, and he was getting very bored with eating roots and berries. He raced after the goat, ignoring the flashes of pain as rocks stabbed the pads of his paws. Ujarak wasn't behind him anymore, and he wondered where the other cub had gone. Well, he looked for him after he caught the goat. The mountain goat sprang over a boulder and darted around a narrow ridge of stone. When Toklo followed it, he saw the goat standing on the edge of a cliff. The meadow was a long way below them, so far that the flowers and the grass blurred together in a hazy green mist. He hadn't realized they were up so high. It would be a long way to fall if he slipped, and he shuddered, thinking about the grisly result at the bottom. He skidded to a halt about 3 bear lengths from the goat, his paws kicking up a cloud of tiny stones. The goat eyed him warily, its hooves scrabbling close to the edge. Surely it's not crazy enough to jump, Toklo thought. The goat was so close he could smell the blood pumping. It would be so easy to sink his teeth in and rip that goat, feasting enough to keep him strong for days. But he couldn't risk it. The goat was more sure-footed up here than he was. If he tried to lunge at it, it could easily sidestep and send him plummeting over the edge. Toklo glared at the goat. He was exhausted, hungry, and frustrated, and there was nothing he could do but walk away from the only meal he'd seen in days. There was a piercing shriek from the sky. Toklo looked up and saw a huge golden eagle swooping down, aiming straight for the goat. It sank its claws into the goat's back and dragged the animal off the cliff. With a bray of terror, the goat toppled over the edge, bounced off a couple large rocks, and crashed to the side of the mountain below on a gentle slope that led into the meadow. Toklo sprinted down the mountain toward the fallen goat, leaping from boulder to boulder. As he got closer, the eagle swooped in and landed on the goat, digging its talons in. With a caw of triumph, the eagle stabbed at the prey with its beak and tore off a strip of meat. "Hey!" Toklo shouted. "That's my prey! Get away from it!" He galloped up to the goat and stood up on its hind legs, roaring. The eagle shook itself, and suddenly there was a shower of golden feathers onto the ground at Toklo's paws. Black fur sprouted along the eagle's back and down its legs as its wings shrank into sturdy round paws. And then Ujarak was standing there, panting and looking very pleased with himself. "Did you see that?" he cried. "I chose what I wanted to turn into. And it was something useful. And I killed some prey for us." Toklo grunted. "Yeah, all right. Well done." Ujarak turned back to the goat, using his paws to peel the skin. "I can't believe I did that," he babbled. "I was chasing after you, and then I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could turn into something that could catch this goat easily? And then I did. It was amazing." Toklo eyed Ujarak warily. "I still like you better as a bear." It all seemed very unnatural to him, but he was too hungry to care how they caught their first real meal in days. He crouched beside Ujarak and tucked in. A cool wind trailed through the dense forest, making the trees murmur and the leaves dance. It was late in the day, close to sunset, and the air was heavy with the possibility of rain. Toklo's skin prickled under his fur as the fire from the sky was skittering along his whiskers. He kept his nose low to the ground as he led Udrak through the woods searching for food with half his attention, while looking for shelter with the other half. They would need a warm, dry place to spend the night if a storm was coming. He could smell something strange not far off, like burned trees and wood ash. Luckily, their path led away from the scent. He didn't want to get closer to it unless he had to. A small shape darted out from under a bush, and both bears jumped. Toklo realized it was a hare as it raced away. Udrak let out a startled yelp, and Toklo turned around. Long ears were sprouting from the top of Udrak's head as the cub shrank and his hind legs stretched and got skinnier, folding under his body. No, Toklo yelled, but it was too late. Udrak had turned into a hare, and not on purpose. Toklo was sure. Wait, stay there, he commanded, but Udrak hare was already off and running in the direction the first hare had gone. Toklo sighed, watching him disappear into the shadows. Now he wouldn't be able to kill and eat any hares, just in case it was that butterfly-brained cub. A roar sounded from somewhere close by, and Toklo's fur stood on end. There was another bear in the woods. Toklo leaped to his paws and started running. He burst into a clearing and saw a hare trapped against a stand of thick bushes. Facing it, claws outstretched, was a scrawny black bear cub, about half Toklo's size. Her fur was thin and her roar was weak from hunger. She was clearly starving and ready to eat anything, including Udrak hare. No! Toklo bellowed, launching himself across the clearing. He bundled into the black bear, knocking her over and pinning her to the ground. She fought back, biting and scratching more fiercely than he had expected. For such a skinny bear, she had surprising strength. You can't eat that hare, Toklo roared at her. Yes, I can, she yelped. I caught it. One of her paws swiped his nose, leaving a stinging claw scratch on his muzzle. Ow, he growled. He shoved her paws down and held her in place with his weight. Wait! Stop! Toklo glanced over his shoulder and saw that the hare had changed back into a bear cub. Udrak was standing on his hind legs, waving his paws at the fighting cubs. Don't hurt her, Udrak pleaded. Look at her. She's half starved. She's no threat to us. Let her go, Toklo. The black bear stopped struggling. Toklo looked back down at her. She was staring at him with enormous eyes. You're Toklo? She said. Yes, he said. The black bear scrambled out from underneath him and got to her paws. I'm Lusa, she said. I've been looking for you. And that's the end. That was a big cliffhanger, third grade. There is a little tidbit here. The next page says, keep watching for Seeker's Book 2, Great Bear Lake. Turn the page for a sneak peek. Should we go for it? Sure, let's do it. Chapter 1, Lusa. So this is book 2. It's a sneak peek. So if you're really curious and excited about this series, I would definitely check out the second book. Lusa stared at the grizzly cub. He was twice her size. In the desperate struggle, trapped under his weight, she had thought that he would kill her for sure. But she wasn't scared of him now, watching him crouched in front of her, panting, his flanks heaving. She had found Oka's missing cub. Red light from the setting sun trickled through the leaves, speckling Toklo's brown pelt with spots of burning russet. I could have searched for him all my life and never found him. Did the spirits guide me? For a moment she couldn't speak, as if a huge paw was clamped around her jaws. Toklo glared at Lusa. How do you know my name? I've been looking for you, Lusa stumbled over her words. I've come all the way from Bear Bowl to tell you. What's the Bear Bowl? It's a place where bears live, Lusa explained. Black bears like me and grizzlies and huge white bears. Flat faces come and look at us. There are other animals too, she added. Tigers and flamingos and animals with long dangling noses. Toklo interrupted her with a huff of contempt. What has that got to do with me? Lusa looked at him. He seemed so angry about something. Would he blame her for what she was about to tell him? She felt her belly go tight. She knew she wouldn't be able to fight him off a second time, but she had promised Oka. The Flatfaces brought your mother to the bear bowl. She died there. She had already decided there was no point making Toklo even more angry by telling him how Oka had been crazy with grief for her lost cubs, so upset that she had attacked a Flatface. Before she died, she gave me a message for you. She said, "I don't want to hear it." Toklo turned away. Startled, Lusa took a pace toward him. "But I promised." I said, "I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear anything about that bear. She abandoned me. She is not my mother." He stalked away, his paws crunching through the dried leaves until he stopped under a twisted fir tree. "She was sorry," Lusa murmured. She didn't think Toklo had heard her. Without looking at her, he snarled, "Go back to the bear bowl." Lusa blinked at him, puzzled. She had risked her life to find him and tell him what Oka had wanted him to know. She had expected that Toklo would be grateful to her. Maybe he would even become her friend, so she wouldn't be lonely anymore. He was a cub like her, and she had never imagined he would be so fierce and angry. What had she done to make him so hostile? She couldn't go back to the bear bowl. The wild was bigger than she had thought, and she didn't think she could find the way back. She clamped her jaws shut to stop a whimper from coming out. There was no way she'd show Toklo how scared she was. Lusa's gaze drifted to the other brown bear cub, who was sitting watching her with bright interest. Her belly lurched as she remembered what she had glimpsed during the struggle with Toklo. She had been chasing a hare, hadn't she? A growl from her belly reminded her that she was still hungrier than she'd ever been in her life. She'd been chasing a bear, and it had turned into this cub. Her mother hadn't said anything about hares turning into bears, or any other animal for that matter. Was this a bear or a hare? And would it change again? Lusa stared at it suspiciously, looking for long ears suddenly shooting up. "Hello," the brown cub said, getting up and padding over to her. He was smaller than Toklo, and his eyes were warm and curious. "My name's Ujarak. You're Lusa, right?" Lusa nodded. Are you a bear or a hare?" she burst out. Ujarak lifted his shoulder in a shrug, rippling the shiny brown fur. "I don't know. I can be lots of other creatures too. A salmon, an eagle. Sometimes I'm a flat-faced cub." "A flat-face?" Lusa stiffened. Would Ujarak be a kind flat-face like the feeders in the bear bowl, or one of the dangerous ones who shouted and shot their metal sticks? "Why would you want to be a flat-face?" "I don't exactly want to be anything," Ujarak replied. "Well, except a bear, of course. It just happens." He glanced at Toklo. "I'm trying to control it, but I'm not very good yet." "So you're really a bear," Lusa checked. His ears were definitely small and round right now, nothing like a hare's. "I think so," Ujarak blinked. "I hope so." Lusa looked around. The trees grew close together here, with little room for berry bushes underneath. But there was no scent of flat faces or dogs. "Is this Toklo's territory?" The big grizzly cub looked quite strong enough to score his claws on the trees and defend his feeding ground from other bears. "No, we're on a journey." An amber glow lit deep in Ujarak's eyes. "We're going to a place where the bear spirits dance in the sky." "Where's that?" Ujarak looked at his paws. Definitely bear's paws, Lusa thought. "We don't know exactly," he confessed. "We're following the stars." He looked up again. "But I have to get there, however long it takes." Something in Lusa prompted her to stretch up and touch her nose to the cub's furry ear. "You'll find the place. I know you will." Ujarak turned his head to stare at her. "You understand, don't you?" he said softly, "because you have kept going until you found Toklo." Lusa nodded. "I promised Oka that I'd find him, and I did. Will you come with us?" Ujarak asked suddenly, "to the place where the bear spirits dance?" Lusa wondered if Oka's spirit would be there, and if Oka would tell Toklo herself how much she loved him. Lusa wanted to see that happen more than anything, and she didn't have anywhere else to go. Besides, she'd been good at finding Toklo, hadn't she? Perhaps Ujarak would need her help to find the place he was looking for. "I'll come," she announced. "Great," yelped Ujarak, bouncing on his front paws. Even though he was younger than Lusa, he was bigger than her, and she took a step back to avoid getting bounced on. "Do you think Toklo will mind?" she asked, glancing at the brown bear cub who was still standing under the fir tree with his back to them. "He doesn't seem to like me very much." Ujarak followed her gaze. "Toklo doesn't like anyone very much, including myself," he remarked quietly. Lusa glanced at him in surprise, but before she could say anything, Toklo had swung around and pushed his way out from under the spindly branches. He glared at Lusa. "You can't slow us down," he warned. Lusa bit back a growl. It wasn't Toklo's journey, it was Udrak's, so he shouldn't be bossing her around. But she just shook her head. I'll keep up, she promised, though she hoped they'd stop to eat soon because her legs were feeling wobbly underneath her grumbling belly. Toklo swung his head from side to side. Why are we standing around here? We need to find shelter for the night. Without another word, he headed off into the shadows under the trees. Udrak trotted after him, his stumpy tail twitching. Lusa stood still for a moment. Was this really what she wanted? Being a wild bear didn't mean traveling who knew where with 2 brown bears, did it? But the only other choice was staying here without him, and she had had enough of being on her own. Even wild bears have company, she reminded herself. Wait for me, she called, and bounced off to catch up with her new companions. Lusa shifted into a more comfortable position and parted her jaws in a huge yawn. Moonlight filtering through the leaves turned her paws to silver. She was curled up in a tree where 2 thick branches met the trunk and made a bowl shape just big enough for a small black bear. She knew she ought to sleep, but her pelt prickled with curiosity, and every time she closed her eyes, excitement made them fly open again. She had found Toklo, but now she was on another journey, and none of them knew exactly where it would lead. Toklo and Udrak had squeezed themselves into a hollow beneath the roots of the tree. They weren't sleeping either. Lusa could hear them shifting about and snuffling below her. She caught the deep growl of Toklo's voice and craned her neck to hear him more clearly. This is ridiculous, he was saying. She can't stay with us. Lusa's belly clenched with fear. Was Toklo going to leave her behind after all? I don't care. If they won't let me travel with them, I'll just follow them. You said that she could come, Udrak reminded Toklo. No, I didn't. Well, you didn't say she couldn't. I'm saying it now. Excuse me. Toklo replied irritably. Why would we want a black bear with us? She's not even a wild bear. Lusa wanted to jump down and confront Toklo. She might not have been born in the wild, but she had managed just fine for moons and moons. She wanted to be a wild bear, even if it meant never going back to the bear bowl and her family. And black bears were as good as grizzlies any day. Her father had said that they were kings of the forest. She was bunching her muscles to leap down when Udrak spoke. His voice was quiet and he sounded older than before. I think I was meant to find Lusa. I think she was meant to come with us. A scoffing noise came from Toklo. If she can't keep up, she won't want to stay with us anyway, Udrak went on. But I think the spirits of the bears are waiting for her, just as much as they are waiting for you and me. Above them, Lusa shivered as she crouched on the edge of her sleeping place, staring down at the bear-scented darkness. There you go. There's a sneak peek for book 2. And that concludes our Seekers, Book 1, The Quest Begins. Oh boy, we've been reading for 27 minutes. I am going to go ahead and make our voting actually be on Wednesday. So the Read Aloud posted tomorrow on Wednesday will include the different titles, the different options that you can vote on. So I will read a snippet from each of those books, and then I will give you guys an opportunity to vote on Wednesday on our next Read Aloud book. So thanks for listening. I miss you guys so much. We can do this together. Day 2 of distance learning. Have a great day.